Okay, good afternoon and welcome to everybody. I wanted to start by thanking ColCapital and the Colombian National Advisory Board on Impact Investing for sponsoring this panel. We have four fantastic participants this afternoon. We have the head of SEAF, which is an important impact investment-oriented fund, the head of Bamboo Capital, the head of Alphamundi, and the head of Acumen Fund, the president of Acumen Fund. Welcome, Agnes, Philippe, Tim, and Carlyle. I will not spend time talking about each of you. Your bios are in the webpage of the summit. So let's spend that time more discussing and talking about impact investing. And I would like to start by opening the question, in essence, what is impact investing? Why is it different? And how is it different from traditional investment and from philanthropy or donations? What are the challenges that are relevant to impact investing? And how is it more, efficient, if I may use that term, with respect to impact than traditional philanthropy? Or how is it also compatible with attractive returns in traditional investment? So I'll let Carlyle open the conversation. And the idea is that this is going to be a dialogue more than presentations by each of the four of you. So Carlyle, welcome to Colombia through the web. And we're very happy to have you here.
Luis, thank you for having me. And I think it's a very important question to kind of position impact investing. Some people think of it between philanthropy and investing. This impact investing is more like investing. However, because it operates from a position that and a belief that you can use market forces, you can develop going concerns and use almost a different structure, if you will, to create companies that will solve problems, social problems, and that these can be going concerns, these can be more than financially sustainable, these can provide financial returns. Fundamental difference is that, and you can see it in the companies that we are working in Colombia through a management company called Alive and a fund called ALEG. The companies all have impact built into their strategies. So they're working in agriculture and smallholder farmers and connecting smallholder farmers to markets. They're working in education through virtual platforms to access youth so that they have better skills to be employed. They're working in energy to provide off-grid access to off-grid populations that are remote. These are companies that have built from the beginning into their strategy to have impact, and yet their success is that as they scale, as they become successful, their impact scales. So very different from philanthropy, where you could use philanthropy to provide solar to X number of people, or you could train X number of people in workforce development, but then your philanthropy runs out. These are companies that are going concerns. And you can put in equity and you can fund them, and that funding then creates a sustainable company that as it grows also continues to create impact. Challenges, of course, exist. How different are they from a regular company? We evaluate risk in the companies that we've invested in through our partnership in Alive. We look at strategy, and of course the strategy involves how you create impact. But we also look at the risks that are in the geographies. We also look at the stage of the companies. So I think there is a real question as to, is there a give and take between returns and impact, which may be a subject for this panel. In our view, we're actually looking at the actual risks, evaluating those risks, and impacting part of the strategy becomes part of it, but not the only. So we talk about the risk adjustment in the types of investments that we're making, and that actually implies a certain return. But we don't talk about an absolute give and take between returns and impact. And that's partially because we're looking at companies that have impact built into their strategy from the get-go.
Perfect, Carla. Thank you very much. Team, would you like to add to Carla's comments?
Sure, happy to. Although she has covered the main points, I would say that we have an increasing synergy between mainstream investments and impact investing. Impact investing began as a bit of a niche. It came out of microfinance that was first commercialized, and now it's gone into energy and housing and sustainable food and agriculture. And we're seeing that impact investing is growing across asset classes as well, right? It began in private equity and private debt, but today you find it in listed equity and debt. You find it in cash management and treasury. And so it's exciting to see that what began as a niche approach is now becoming mainstream. And in fact, in Switzerland and Europe, the rules for financial institutions are now requiring an increasing amount of disclosure on the impact that all of your investments are having. And so we're seeing impact being embedded as a mainstream approach today in Europe. And I think this is a global trend. And I'll finish by saying also that the vast majority of impact investors are looking for market benchmarks in terms of their financial performance. And those that are not are doing so on purpose because they're trying to create new markets. And I think that's very important to stress that every year we have annual industry reports from the Global Impact Investing Network that speak to the performance of impact investing. And consistently for the last decade since impact investing began, we've had the bulk of the impact investors satisfied in how they've achieved their financial performance. So these days, the discussion now for institutional investors in Switzerland and Europe, and hopefully in Colombia and Latin America as well, is not should I do impact investing? It is really how should I implement impact in my portfolio, in my investment policies, and in my governance structure.
Let me ask you an additional question, more specific. Do you consider that at this stage, impact investing is already an asset class, or we're not there yet?
That's a great question, because I think impact investing began in terms of perception as an asset class. And that's because most of impact investing happened in private equity. But today, impact investing is multi-asset class, absolutely. And if you look at the distribution of assets, 50% of impact investing worldwide is now focused on developed markets, Europe and the US, and 50% in emerging markets. So it's no longer a southern problem. It's no longer a single asset class. It's really a global approach to mobilize the financial industry for these sustainable development goals, the 2030 agenda, and the transition to a sustainable economy. And I think that's more relevant than ever in a time of COVID, where all our systems are being tested, and for countries like Colombia that have so much to offer, but also so many hurdles to create an equal society and a sustainable economy.
Perfect, thank you. John Philippe, can you add some views on this first topic?
Sure, thank you, Luis. And I would say, I can agree. I cannot agree more than with Carlyle and Tim on what they said. Something that has worked for me is in terms of definition of what is impact investing is actually making a difference between the traditional regular investing activities and what is then called responsible investing, sustainable investing, and impact investing, and it can be very confusing, right? So for me, responsible investing, and as I see it, is really when I invest, how do I make sure that I do not harm anything, right? So I'm not investing in ammunitions, weapons, very polluting industries. So I screen out of my portfolio things that are harmful to people or to the environment. That's responsible. Sustainable is going one step beyond, and it's basically saying, not only do I not do any harm, but I'm trying to do good things for sustainable, management of the companies, for the stakeholders of the companies, and that's on social, on governance, and on environment. And we impact investors are going yet another step beyond, and we're saying, very much like Carlyle said, we're trying to solve a problem. So how do we proactively solve the problem through our investments? And that's, to me, that's the definition of impact investing. It's really proactively investing to solve a problem that we have identified. social, economic, or environmental. That's number one. Number two, on the question of risk return and trade-off between financial and social returns. Again, I agree with Carlyle and with Tim. I think you can, in the field of impact investing, just avoid the trade-off, and you can maximize your financial returns and your social returns and your environmental returns in one investment strategy. Now, to qualify that statement, I would say that sometimes if you go to very tough segments, early stage companies, seed stage investment in venture capital, in difficult environments, it may be that the companies you're supporting are not generating the type of return you can offer to traditional investors given their risk perception. So what we're doing then is to use what is then called blended finance mechanism, whereby you use some sort of, philanthropic or risk-taking catalytic capital to de-risk the private sector investors. And then, even though you go in the very risky investment, you can deliver to the financial investors a risk-adjusted return, right? So it's really not qualifying all investments as having a trade-off, and it's not also saying, don't worry, there's never a trade-off ever. I would have said that 20 years ago. Now, after 20 years of experience, I can tell you that there are trade-offs in investing, and you need to de-risk in order to provide to the financial investors a risk-adjusted return. And that brings me to my last comment on philanthropy. Again, I cannot agree more than with what Carl had said. I don't think impact investing is there to replace philanthropy. I think philanthropy by definition is limited. And I think philanthropy should actually keep focusing on what the private enterprise and the private sector cannot do, and where the private enterprise and private sector and private capital cannot solve problems. To the opposite, philanthropy should not go and waste their money to where the private sector can do things at scale, right? And that's the beauty of it, is that indeed, Carlyle, when you invest for growth, we know that the pools of private capital can be tapped, and they're gigantic compared to philanthropy. Mm-hmm. The only caveat against to that is to say, whenever you want to entice private capital to new segments that they don't know, they don't feel comfortable about, or there's no track record, you can use intelligent, modern philanthropy, so to speak, to de-risk those private sector investments, to build the track record so that eventually you can scale without philanthropy. So that's on the three items that you just mentioned.
Perfect, thank you. Agnes, last but not least, you have a special perspective in addition to the rest of the panelists, which is international aid. And I'm going to pose a tough question to you. Can you help us understand the difference between philanthropy, private equity, international aid, and impact investing?
Great question. Let me just follow on before that, and I think I can answer that too, what Jean-Philippe just said, because I think what's important to kind of understand is that impact investing, I don't think it's static, and it's evolved over time, right? Because I think all of us were involved in kind of the formation of the first impact investing funds that, as Tim mentioned, grew out of microfinance. But that's evolved. The two things that I think haven't changed is, one, impact investing is intentional. So it's not just screening out bad things. It's really picking companies that are intentional about impact. And second, this idea of blended capital that I think was kind of emerged as a way of helping more commercial type of investors manage risk, but really has stuck around, as somebody referred to it as the capital lasagna sometimes, where you're kind of layering different types of capital that have different risk appetites in order to make an entire dish that is digestible by the enterprise that you're trying to invest into. And that's also to say that that's how I see the differences between philanthropy, between government aid, between private equity, between even venture capital, that depending on the type of enterprise, the type of investment that you're trying to make, you would pull from these different types of capital providers, resource providers that have different risk appetites and different types of capital that they can offer, and figure out how to layer that capital to provide a package that makes sense to result in the growth of the enterprise that you're trying to invest into and of the impact that that enterprise is trying to deliver. So for example, in our experience, we have seen where, we have a company in Morocco that we invested into to help them deliver. They use drones to deliver agricultural data to smallholder farmers to really foresee things like drought, for example, and address that before it becomes an issue. They have started out in Morocco, and we've invested in them for expansion there. But then they received a grant from USAID because they want to expand into West Africa, into places like Mali, where actually you don't have any service providers. And for a service provider to consider Mali as a market, it would be very difficult on a purely commercial basis. So USAID is funding that expansion strategy so that they can start activities in Mali and potentially through expansion, make that a commercial activity. But a pure commercial investor would never back a strategy like that for that company. So that's where you can blend capital from government and more private equity investment. So SEAF, our fund, invests in growth capital. So we're more private equity than anything else. You can blend those two, the provision of that capital, to result in overall growth of the company and the growth of the impact, because now you have impact in Mali, not just the Moroccan farmers. So this is the type of capital lasagna that I think you can create at the company level that really helps advance that company growth. I'm not sure if I answered that question.
Oh, you did, and let me do a follow-up. In that lasagna concept that you present, how easy or difficult is it to bake it? Because it's complicated enough with one particular investor. If you bring 3 or 4 types of investor into a blended capital structure, what's your experience on that? Is it
exactly
so rare?
Yeah, so it's about aligning interest, right? It's not easy, and I think that's why people with a track record in impact investing and in blended capital are very valuable people, because it's not very easy to understand how to mix this type of capital. I will say that, to me, aligning the interests of investors and of other stakeholders is really key. So this is both for impact and for financial returns, because what you have to understand is that commercial investors are looking for the financial return. They're in this company, they want the financial dividends, right? They want that company to be sold for an exit with hopefully a lot of appreciation of their equity. At the same time, USAID, they don't really care about that. What they really care is that company expands and that more and more farmers have access to the services. So in that way, even though USAID is looking for a completely impact return, and the commercial investors are looking for the financial return, we're both achieving that at the same time by this company expanding into Mali, because potentially Mali is a lucrative market as the company grows there, but also USAID is getting the impact, which is lots of farmers getting access to these services. This is not a difficult concept, including within government. A lot of government entities don't want to work with investors because there's actually a lot of perception of not being aligned and not trying to achieve the same goal. But in fact, it is achieving the same goal. Both we want more farmers to be using it, so we get more revenue. They want more farmers to be using it, so those farmers receive the benefit. It's a very simplified way of thinking about it, but I think it's possible, and I think it really helps companies that may not be willing to go into these difficult places that would be more impactful, make that journey and still make that journey sustainable and really provide returns to their investors.
Great, thank you. Let's move to a second theme of questions. And if we simplify the process of investing privately, You need to raise capital, you need to find targets and deploy it, you need to manage and help improve those targets, and eventually you need to make an exit. I'm going to ask Jean-Philippe to try to help us understand the difference with respect to impact investing in those four fronts. Why is it more challenging? And at the same time, why can it be more impacting and more efficient than simple donations? So let's try to move into that second thematic of discussion and see how we do with that one. Jean-Philippe.
Well, I'm okay. I'll do my best to answer that. Frankly, I don't see many differences with traditional investing and impact investing when it comes to investing, except what Agnes just mentioned here at the company level. But as an impact investor, when I have a very clear investment strategy and what I call a theory of change, which is exactly what sort of problems am I trying to solve and what are the critical bottlenecks I'm trying to remove through my investments. And once I have identified how to track that and report on that, and once I have identified my investment universe, I'm no different from any other investor. I'm maximizing my financial returns, and because that's what I'm promising to my investors, and that's my fiduciary responsibility. You can then in the life of the company, you can be facing a set of questions and challenges that would bring you to the questions that Agnes was alluding to, right? I mean, am I expanding my network of my branches of my microfinance company in regions where I know they are not going or are going to be barely profitable because it's impactful and because it's social, or am I just not doing that because I'm maximizing my ROE and my IRR as a private equity investor? So it is true that in the life of the companies that we are investing in, you can face that type of question. Now, the way we usually get away with this is to precisely in the selection process of the pipeline companies. And again, as Carlyle was mentioning, we're trying to make sure that we invest in companies where the impact is truly embedded in the business model and in the product or the service they're selling, right? So that allows me to avoid that kind of trade-off, because I know that if the company grows and it's going to grow fast, if it becomes profitable, and the more it's profitable, the more it can attract resources, then I know that my impact is demultiplied. So I'm not sure you'll be happy about my answer, but I don't see a lot of differences. What is important compared to traditional funds when you're selling an impact investing fund is not only, of course, to be clear about your investment strategy, your segment, type of companies, their stages, your hypothesis and your thoughts about the economic value creation. The big difference is, can you prove your impact thesis, your theory of change? Can you articulate it clearly? And again, can you make sure that you have identified, the key variables and data that you will be monitoring so that you prove your impact and you track your impact? And if you're not capable of doing that, you shouldn't call yourself an impact investor, because you're greenwashing or social washing. That's my take. So I don't know. I hope my fellow colleagues, panelists, agree with me.
Let me ask Tim and then Carlyle if you differ from Jean-Philippe's position that it's not that different. Tim?
No, I have to say that you will probably find all of the panelists agreeing most of the time, because we all are very convinced by impact investing, and I think we've all worked hard to create standards that we can all use and refer to make it easier for new investors to come into the industry. And so this collaboration over the last decade has led us to emerge with a consensus, I think, regarding this point. So I wouldn't have much different to add from Jean-Philippe's points.
Carla, do you think it's quite similar, impact investing to private equity investing? I tend to differ, but I would like to hear what you think.
Well, I tend to differ as well, although I think Jean-Philippe, although he said it's exactly the same at the end, said it's not the same, because I think there's several differences I'd love to point out, and which we're working very hard on in our fund in Colombia and Peru. Well, I think there is a big thing about measuring impact and managing for impact. And so I do think that is a different dimension. I do think it's you're managing for financial returns and you're managing for impact, so you have to do both, but that is a difference. We're also quite focused on gender, under the belief system that is a problem also that needs to be addressed and solved within the Latin American culture, and that a stronger company is also, gender balanced. And so again, I think that is a difference, but staying true to your strategic objectives, which include impact, means that you have a different dimension. That's one aspect that I think Jean-Philippe really talks about, but says, I find it a difference, it's not a similarity. I would talk about another difference, which I think, and Tim, it's to your point as to whether or not this is an asset class already. I think if you look at Colombia and Peru, at least my experience looking at it with our team, there is that this is not a well-established concept yet in Colombia and Peru, that you can actually invest and solve a problem at the same time and protect your capital and get a risk-adjusted return is not well accepted. And access to capital is a difference for these companies. We started A-Leg, created this management company in partnership with the MDs, Virgilio Barco and Santiago Alvarez, in order to create a fund called the Latin American Economic Growth Fund it's actually invest in these companies that have already been de-risked to the point that was made by Jean-Philippe earlier, but who don't have access to the capital. It's both real capital and it's social capital. It's talent and support that is not as available. So I do think that makes this very different from a regular investment.
Okay, and let me focus, Agnes, Carla, on two particular dimensions in addition to the one you've mentioned. Measuring return, can seem a science, but sometimes it's an art. But measuring impact, it's a challenge. How do you balance that when you report to investors? And finally, how much more difficult is it to exit from impact investments than from traditional investments?
So two incredibly important points. One, in measuring impact. So through Acumen, Acumen has created a process called lean data of surveying in a very cost-effective way the end users of the companies that we've invested in. And so our fund has, and I think unique, a contract that measures the starting point of the company in terms of how their end users, the impact of the product and how many end users, not only from a breadth, how many am I touching, from a depth, what is the difference that I'm making, so qualitative. And that's so a measurement when you start the investment, a measurement when you are midway through, if you will, and a measurement at the end. So there's a reporting process and discipline related to staying accountable, if you will. There is, measuring impact is not, nobody's decided on the true method yet, but certainly measuring the voice of the customer of the smallholder farmer, of the student that's taken your courses, of the individual that's gotten placed in a job and stays in that job, and for how long he stays in that job, of someone that gets solar light or access to energy that didn't have it before. Though staying accountable to the differences and measuring those differences, not only on a qualitative level, as well as on a breadth, how many, is one way that we're doing it. To answer your question on exits, yes, that is a challenge. That's a challenge that has to do, in my view, with the development of the capital market that you're actually operating in. Latin America or Colombia has a more developed capital market than some of the markets that we're involved in, for sure. And so it remains to be seen. Has that been a challenge? Is that a challenge? Yes. Why? Again, it goes back to availability of capital. If these are growth companies, they need capital to continue to grow, and it's very difficult to take that tell the investor, well, please take me out now. And so if there is a scarcity of capital, if you will, you end up in a position where it's very difficult to exit. That it's there as a possibility, that it can be done. We fundamentally believe it can be done because we believe, and one of the reasons for the work we're doing in Colombia and Peru is to prove that this is an asset class that you can solve a problem and get your capital and get a risk-adjusted return. We fundamentally believe we can prove that, and it's one of the things that we want to change. We want to, solidify, if you will, grow this asset class in Colombia and Peru.
Perfect, thank you. Agnes, would you like to add to how similar or different impact investing is from traditional investing or equity or private equity?
Yeah, I think that my view is they're coming closer together. And the reason that they are different, but I think they're coming closer together. And I actually think COVID and the current crises is bringing it closer together, because what I see in private equity is that investors are starting to look at what we call impact and not addressing that as a risk for their own investments. So they're starting to look at ESG, so environmental, social, and governance issues, as not only screens that are static and that you look at before you make the investment, but actually as ways of, if the company is addressing these issues in their country, in their operations, therefore that company is probably less risky as an investment than if they're not. So if they are, for example, if they have a very, as Carlyle was saying, very kind of gender balanced company, if they are really addressing the climate change risks that not only the company directly, but for example, its suppliers are facing and will have to adapt to, that's a much more investable company. So because private equity investors and other investors, institutional investors, are starting to look at these risks in these same sectors that impact investing is trying to create solutions, I feel that those two are coming closer together. And I think Tim alluded to that when he said that in Europe, there's actually new regulations about if you call yourself a sustainable investor, you have to track certain metrics of how you're trying to actually affect that sustainability. The SEC, SEAF is an SEC registered investor. The SEC in the US is looking at a similar approach. It hasn't done that yet, but they're looking at how do we incorporate environmental and social and governance metrics into reporting the same way that you have accounting standards. Maybe there should be standards on those. So basically, in the end, I think those two worlds are coming closer together because of the issues that the world is facing as a result of COVID, which has frankly really put a big spotlight on a lot of the inequity, a lot of the issues that are not being addressed. So I don't think, while, I don't know if they're separate or not, but they're definitely coming closer together.
Which would be fantastic because, you have the best of both worlds.
Right.
Now, let me ask you, in addition, I've seen some people that are basically fanatic about pure impact and others that are fanatic about pure investment, although those tend to be a little bit more diplomatic about excess returns. But is it going to be the middle way coming more from the return side or from the impact side? In other words, is the world going to take us to a point of such crisis and inequality and climate catastrophes that the impact prone will win, or is it going to be the other way around with more ESG components?
I think I think they'll come together. First, I don't think that, finance first investors are realizing the types of returns, unless they're, I guess, in the public markets, but in the private markets, they're maybe not are realizing the type of returns long-term. I know institutional investors are not, that they're really looking for, partially because of all the issues that exist in the world that finance first investing is not solving. So I do feel that, I don't think you can be purist about impact. I do think that, impact investing, there's a lot of greenwashing, but there's also a lot of just trying to make things absolutely perfect, which it's not a perfect science. Impact collection is difficult. it's costly. It doesn't necessarily, just because you collect impact doesn't mean that you necessarily are using it to improve things. You know, I've seen people just collect impact metrics and just report them out, not necessarily, you know, is it better, as Carlyle was saying, is it better if we are supporting, you know, 1,000 farmers more, or is it better that if 500 farmers that we're supporting are doing better? I don't know, right? So there's a lot of, it goes back to the theory of change of your investor. But frankly, I do think that in the end, I think investors are realizing that there doesn't such a huge difference, and you can't be extreme on either end. But I'm hopeful that there's a happy middle, and I hope that middle emerges before the world goes into the scenario that you described, which is a total catastrophe and all these issues that we care about.
Great, thank you. Let's move to the last theme of this panel, which is trying to bring it closer to developing countries, in particular Colombia, perhaps Peru, Mexico. How different is impact investing in this type of countries versus developed countries? And what is going to be necessary for, you know, the impact investment ecosystem in Colombia to develop further? Maybe I'll start with you again, Agnes, and then move through the rest of the panel.
I think, so we have an active fund in Colombia and an active fund in Caribbean, and we're hoping to we have some investments in Central America, and we're hoping to expand there too. So in my mind, it's there, and there are lots of people who are interested in this. I do think that not so much in Colombia, but for example, one of our first investments out of a Caribbean fund is in Guyana. And, you know, when you look at that, just providing jobs that are that provide a living income, that provide some sort of you know, sustainability for people there is already impact to some extent, right? When the unemployment is really high and people are at risk of losing jobs all the time, as opposed to Colombia, where impact maybe is much more around addressing environmental concerns, or addressing the effects of the COVID epidemic, or addressing the effects of migration. So it really depends, and go back to what Jean-Philippe said, what is the theory of change for achieving impact in a different country and a different region within country? I mean, you know, there are different regions within countries, so something that might make sense in Bogota that could be impactful, that might have a different approach somewhere else in Colombia, so in a more rural area. So I think it's really important to understand, once again, that it's not a static kind of equation, that it's really thinking about what is it that I'm trying to change with my investment, and how does that bring benefits to the communities and to the beneficiaries of that investment. So for example, at SEAF, we focus on entrepreneurs who help build resilience against climate change, against food insecurity, against inequality. And you could see how those could be applied differently depending on what country we would be investing in. So I think it already exists, and you probably have a lot of impact investors that maybe are not even realizing they're impact investors.
Terrific, thank you. Tim, would you like to contribute on that front, investing in Colombia, in Peru, versus in other latitudes?
Sure, happy to. I mean, right now we're living in the COVID-19 era, right? Still, and you can see the impact of the pandemic is going to be very different in 2021 and 2022 between Europe and the US, where the rates of vaccination are really catching up. The US are at 50% of their target population vaccinated already, and Europe, the prognostic is that by August or September we'll be there. In Latin America, you look at the rates of vaccination, I think they range from 2% in Ecuador to 5% in Colombia. So it's going to be a long, protracted tunnel that these countries from Latin America and Africa are going to be going through to get out of COVID and its economic impact. So right there, I think that's a key vulnerability. That's a good illustration to showcase the difference in realities, right, between Latin, African, Southeast Asian countries and the global North. And for us as impact investors, one of the reasons I I decided to get into this is because a dollar can carry a lot more weight in terms of human lives or environmental impact in the South than in the North. In the North, of course, we have to readapt all of our infrastructure and our production and our consumption patterns because we are the source of climate change worldwide, right? And the great majority of victims are going to be in the South, right? So that's another example where you can see the difference and the interconnection. So for us at Alphamundi, I think there's a number of challenges that we all face. And if the pandemic has taught us one thing, is that we are all interconnected. And we cannot think that an issue somewhere is not going to reach us at some point in some form if we remain inactive, right? And for example, if you look at the melting of the ice, I was in 2006 visiting Antarctica and seeing the melting of the ice over there. And just last winter, Italian villages had to be evacuated 1 hour away from Geneva because they were afraid that the ice would melt in such quantities that they would flood these villages and result in incredible harm. So I think it's time to realize that the Sustainable Development Goals have been crafted for a good reason. It is because we are all facing massive challenges, and the cost of inaction is going to increase with every year. But at the same time, if we take action, if we invest in the transition to a sustainable economy, we can all benefit. The United Nations estimate that we will generate close to $13 trillion in net economic value as we transition to a sustainable economy worldwide. And countries like Colombia have so much to gain from making sustainable and impact investments easier for their investors and capital easier for sustainable companies, right? Colombia has gone through, of course, the longest conflict in modern history, internal conflict. And today you still have roughly 9 million displaced, 2 million or more refugees. You have environmental destruction going on in a number of very pristine and key regions of Colombia, from the coast to the Amazon. And so I think if you want the country to live up to its full potential, and if you want people there to be able to live with dignity, impact investing is not just an option or just a nice to have. It is a moral imperative, and it's also what makes most sense from a financial perspective, because as my fellow panelists have indicated, it's about risk management, right? The Chicago model of the economic analysis had all these externality boxes that it did not deal with, right? They were not in the financial models. Today, we have the data, we have the knowledge, we have the science, and we know how to price these externalities, and we know the cost of ignoring them. And so if you invest in impact companies and impact funds, typically you will achieve two things. The first one is you will reduce your risk and increase your risk-adjusted return over time. And the second one is you will contribute to a more sustainable society. And who doesn't want that, right? If you can earn the same risk-adjusted return and have a positive impact on your own environment, your community, why not, right?
Yeah, that would be the ideal objective. Jean-Philippe, Colombia and Peru are developing countries. What is your view and how can countries like Colombia enhance and promote more impact investing?
Well, first of all, Bamboo is only active in emerging markets and frontier markets, so we're not impact investing in the US or in Europe. So it's difficult for me to make a comparison if that's the question. Maybe one thing that strikes me in most emerging economies for new companies that we're investing in is it is the market potential, the mass market potential that is available for companies to tap into and to try and cover and meet. And that allows new ventures and usually technology ventures, using new technologies to provide mass market affordability and accessibility to new services to leapfrog and really go fast and grow fast. And that's probably, strangely, that's probably easier in some large emerging markets than in very densified and very developed economies where you have many incumbents. So when you think about business model, I do believe that disrupting in largely underserved mass markets is actually very exciting. And I'm talking here business and finance, and of course on top of that, it's impact, Carlyle, right? And it's service to people that have never been serviced, and it's improving lives. So that strikes me as one significant difference, frankly. Now, our headquarters in Latin America are in Bogota, and it's for good reason. We believe that it's a thriving ecosystem for impact. It's improving by the day. I think there are great initiatives, and I think you're going to mention them or at least one of them at the end of this panel. So we feel very comfortable. There's plenty of talent, in the region, in the country. I do believe that we see a thriving ecosystem with many different types of actors, family foundations, corporations, multilaterals, investment funds. We have institutions like Bancoldex, we have Impulsa. I mean, it's exciting, it's moving, and we feel the energy. And frankly, Colombia is leading the pack, and I believe in the region. Is there more to do? Of course, there's always more to do. Is there improvement? Yes, absolutely. Are we on the right track? I do think so.
Perfect, thank you. Carlyle, our friends have focused mostly on the opportunities that exist, which are quite significant. In other words, the targets are there, the potential clients or people to impact are there, and the talent is there. What about the funding? Acumen has been able to raise money not only from abroad, but within Colombia. And there's the view that impact investing funds come from abroad, but they can also come from Colombia. What do you think on that front? Do we have enough savings and capital markets debt to raise impact investment funding in Colombia?
I think there's real potential for sure. What I think is interesting, and I think to your point about how do you increase this space, is you need proof of performance. You need to prove that this model really works with examples, right? So we're in the early stages, I think, in Colombia with respect to that. And what's interesting about you're right, Acumen and Alive and in their fund has been able to raise, almost $30 million, which for this region, I think is a testament to the fact that the funding does exist. What is interesting to me about the funding, and I think Jean-Philippe just mentioned it as well, is a good portion of it is institutional funding. IDB, Bancoldex, Fundación Bancolombia, World Women's Banking, Cali. These are institutions. There was a lot of work to get individuals. And I think the opportunity is, as you prove this model and get individuals more comfortable in this model, the opportunity opens up to be significantly bigger. And I think we do this work actually in America as well. And so we can compare a developing market with a developed market. As Tim pointed out, we all have problems, and we all are seeing them in COVID. And the developing market using the Western market of the United States certainly has inequality that we're seeing in spades and multiple issues. The difference is the availability of capital and the risk acceptance in the culture, in the investing culture, that is significantly higher, or we experience it to be significantly higher in our access to capital to do this work in the United States than we experience in other areas, Colombia included. And so I do think it's incredibly important to prove out this model in a way that demonstrates that you can measure impact, you can have impact, you can solve problems, and you can protect your capital and get a return as well. And that becomes an accepted way of operating that I think will serve to open up much more access to capital, which I think is a constraint. I view it as a constraint. We could do so much more with, we have the tools, we have the experience. There are multiple organizations that are on this panel that can bring experience, and the experience exists and the talent pool exists in Latin America and in Colombia. And I do agree that it's leading the way. I do feel that there's a constraint on the capital side.
Let me follow up on the following. You mentioned that in Colombia, a lot of funds come from institutional sources, but we also have a quite developed pension savings system. We have the system of trust companies, which are somewhat unique to Colombia, las fiduciarias, and we have a significant number of wealthy families that are beginning to function through family offices. What's going to be required to be able to access those three types of investors into the impact investment ecosystem?
I think that's my point about proven performance, Luis, right? In that you've actually, so we have a first fund with Alive. Imagine how many possibilities open up in your second fund. You now have an experienced managing directors, you have an experienced team, you have demonstrated not only value creation, but probably monetization of at least a few. And with that, there's a much, you have decreased the risk of putting your money in an intermediary called a fund to go do this work, right? And I think those sources of funds need and want the protection of the intermediary.
Perfect, thank you. Well, we're about to come to a closing. I want to thank the four of you for two particular reasons. Number one, for working so hard to promote impact investing around the world, but more specifically for investing in Colombia, for undertaking the challenge to seek and to bring impact investment resources into Colombia, to make those investments, to follow them. I've seen a couple of you working in Colombia for a number of years in very remote regions of this country, regions in which most Colombians do not even dare to go. So, chapeau to you, really amazing and very inspiring from the Colombian perspective. Let me just close by thanking, ColCapital and making reference to an important development that was formalized at the end of 2019, but that consolidated during 2020, which is the creation of the Colombian National Advisory Board on Impact Investing. This is a group of 13 directors that have come together with the support of ColCapital, with the support of the Canadian Embassy through its international aid support, and with the participant of a surprising large number of members of the ecosystem. When we began convoting the group, we never realized how many of us existed. More than 100 qualified participants in Colombia in some capacity or other being part of the impact investment process. So this is very exciting because we need to come together as a country. We are sufficiently divided in a number of areas, but we do not need to be divided between pure private equity or pure impact investing or pure international aid or pure philanthropy. We have to bring resources together, blend them, deploy them in different areas of this country, and hopefully we'll have a better Colombia, a more inclusive Colombia, and a more sustainable Colombia. So thank you very much for this panel. I've enjoyed talking to all of you and looking forward to seeing you again investing in our country. Thank you.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Gracias a todos.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Gracias. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Bye.